looking around because my idea is that we need to get to know whatever this is better, not just in terms of the nuts and bolts, but in terms of the intelligences, the agents behind the nuts and bolts. I thought, where's an example of something? It seems to me that the most well-developed conceptual framework for some kind of intelligent, non-human entity was the Islamic idea of the jinn. I said, why not, so let's just imagine, for instance, that maybe it's a jinn-like entity that's in the fifth dimension and they come down here, and here's how the jinn in Islamic tradition are said to behave. Here is what we have noted with close encounters with entities associated with UFO phenomena. There was a big overlap. I said, what we need to do is go through our folklore, our folk beliefs, our religious systems, and take another look at the entities that humanity has left a record of encountering in the past. See if we can make any kind of comparative sense of all of them. I've been trying to accumulate that information, make a chart of all of the different entities in each column and traits listed down the left-hand side, and then which entities show which traits. The fairies, the gentry, and the jinn are so far the two that seem to have the most traits, that seem to be most fully described.
In this week's episode of the Epistemics podcast, we have Dr. Brenda Denzler, a religious studies scholar and author of the book The Lure of the Edge, a landmark book in UFO UAP studies. She also serves on the advisory board of the Society of UAP Studies, and in this episode, we dive into her more recent research, where she draws potential links between the phenomena itself and entities and beings that have emerged throughout history, presented themselves in different cultures and traditions, entities who we also call the jinn. It's a phenomenal episode you don't want to miss. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell so we can continue to produce this content. So without further ado, let's get on with today's episode. Good to know you're good, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today. I've been really excited about having you on for about close to a month now. So there's a lot I want to ask you. There's a lot of background research I've been trying to do, catch up with your work, and there's extensive work that you've done over the years. So I'm really excited about this. So let's get started. The very first thing I guess I want to do is ask you, how did this fascination, this interest in this whole topic of UFOs and UAPs and high strangeness and NHI and all of this stuff, where did it begin? How did it begin?
Well, it began, as it does for many people, when I was a teenager, and I found books in the library about UFOs, and I was fascinated. But we're talking 1960s, small town in the middle of Kansas, so the amount of material that I had to check out was fairly minimal. So there was always that background interest, but it never really went anywhere. When I was older, I got involved in a fundamentalist Christian group and made a separation from that group eventually after 15 years. And shortly after that, met somebody who was psychic. And I had never met anybody that I knew was psychic who gave evidence of being psychic. And that kind of blew my reality apart. I didn't have, and he was a nice guy. I mean, the impression I had was that psychic was of the devil. That was bad. You didn't do that. So I had to rethink a lot of my categories. I decided I wanted to study the paranormal, parapsychology, and go to study at the Rhine Research Center, which is in Durham, North Carolina. But I soon dropped that idea and decided to pursue a degree in religious studies and forgot all about the Rhine, just forgot all about all of that. I ended up going to Duke University, which is right where the Rhine Institute is. Took me a couple of years to realize that I was in the place I had originally intended to go or hoped to go. I didn't do a lot with the Rhine Institute. I kind of browsed and dabbled for a little bit. While I was writing my dissertation, I also, after I did my preliminary work and took my prelim exams, I allowed myself a treat. Just, I was sick of my field of study and just wanted something fun to read instead. And I picked up Whitley Strieber's Communion because it had a really interesting picture on the cover, and communion, that's a religious thing, right? And then it said a true story, and I thought, okay, I don't read much fiction. I mostly, my whole life, most of what I've read has been nonfiction. And so it was a true story. I thought, well, this could be interesting. And it grabbed me quickly. And I found myself pulling the covers up. I read it at night after I got my kids in bed. And I pulled the covers up closer and closer underneath my chin and was looking in the dark corners of the bedroom and down the dark hallway. And I was pretty freaked out. I slept with the light on for about 3 nights after that. And that was my introduction. I was so hooked at that point, I decided to read. The next book I read was Bud Hopkins' Intruders. And I thought, okay, well, this is all pretty weird. And then David Jacobs came out with Secret Life. And I thought, at last, an academic. Somebody who can bring the voice of reason and rationality to this subject. And explain why it's bogus, it's not real, and he didn't do that. Yeah, he in fact took it as a very real phenomenon. And then finally Philip Klass came to give, the arch debunker, came to give a talk at the local planetarium. And I thought, all right, this guy will do it. This guy will explain to me why none of this makes sense. And he didn't. As a matter of fact, he was really unconvincing. It was a big disappointment for me. But at that point, I kind of gave in and said, this is real. And so I began reading as much as I could, gathering my own materials, because they aren't in libraries, most of the UFO stuff that you might want to read. I began going to whatever UFO meetings I could, went to a few UFO conferences, and I developed a survey for people to take. And so those were my 3 areas of research. Participant observer via being a part of meetings and conferences, reading, doing the, and then survey work to find out a little bit about the various aspects of the UFO subculture. And I was doing that and ultimately wound up writing my dissertation on it. I met a woman at one of the UFO meetings who said that she had been abducted, and after her abduction, she had become psychic. And that's not uncommon for people with that kind of experience to report. And she told me that I wouldn't write my dissertation on what I had been planning to write it on, which had nothing to do with UFOs, and that I would have a different committee around me. And she said that she saw a book. And I, duly made a note of all of this in my field notes when I got home from the meeting where I met her, and forgot about it. And about 2 or 3 years later, I wound up getting a new committee, changed my topic to the UFO and alien abduction idea, and had the University of California Press wanting to see the manuscript when it was finished and see if they wanted to adopt it, which they ultimately did. So that's kind of how I came.
Yeah, yeah, and that book, I guess, is this is the book, isn't it?
Yeah,
Right
The
here,
Lure of
guys.
the
So
Edge.
Lure the Edge, and I've got to be honest. As you know, I have dyslexia, so I'm struggling. Um,
Yes.
but I've got through quite, some of the
Yeah.
main chapters,
Hmm.
and it's phenomenal. It's
Thank you.
so thoroughly well researched, and I'm not surprised it was
Yeah.
accepted to be published. And I guess this is one of the books that your main pieces of work that you've really become known about in the
Yeah.
field, in the community,
Hmm.
amongst religious studies, academia, the UFO community, etc. So everyone watching, definitely pick up this book and have a read. It's phenomenal because you again, I don't know if we can talk about this. We'll talk about this later, but you approach the subject in a very unique way. Even back then, like it's looking at the science, looking at the religious perspectives, looking at the zeitgeist and what's going on, mainly post World War II, and bringing all of that information together in one volume is phenomenal. And it doesn't, I can't praise the book highly. And I'm not just saying that. I honestly mean that I've read dozens of books on the subject over the past couple of years. This is probably one of my favorite books, and
Well,
haven't
thank
even
you.
finished it. Yeah, I haven't even finished
Thank
it.
you.
So I,
The
yeah,
title is actually a play on words. The Lure of the
mhm.
Edge. You get lured to the edge when you start looking into UFO stuff. But the question is it the cutting edge of science or is it the lunatic fringe edge? And that's the dynamic, the play that I tried to illustrate in the book.
Yeah, it's a brilliant read. So, Brenda, and again, you're very humble. You like I said, you're very well respected in the field.
Thank you.
And one thing that really impresses me about your approach, at least what I've seen of your recent work, especially, is that you are all guns blazing, fearless, and that's commendable. It's a hard line to toe as an academic, I guess, at times, because there is a specific requirement, a specific system, um, and there's certain things expected of an academic to approach a subject in a certain way. But I think at the same time, while you push the boundaries, you still bring that depth and academic rigor to your work, which you maintain it throughout, which is a brilliant and beautiful balance, and something I've learned from, and I'm learning from as I go through your work, and engage with you uh, online and
Well,
privately, etc.
I appreciate that because I find that, speaking of edges, I find that a difficult edge to balance on. Um, and I have been nervous about the stuff that I've done since 2024 and the UFO stuff and saying some of the things that I've said. But on the one hand, I was trained to footnote out the wazoo. You footnote everything. So boy,
Hmm.
I can footnote. That's one thing I can say I learned in grad school. I learned how to footnote. And on the other hand, I don't have a tenure track position to protect. I don't have to try to get promotion. I have nothing. I have nothing to lose except the respect of people who thought I was intellectually respectable, and um, that has been a challenge for me to try to figure out where the line lies between what's academically respectable to say and what I really want to say, what I really do think, and here's why I think it. I may be wrong, but right now this is what I think. And it's been a hard balance to try to strike. But in the end, uh, I'm taking a chance on not necessarily being 100% academically respectable.
Mhm. But yeah, but I only see you gaining more respect through your approach,
Thank you.
and if anything, you're leading the way for future academics and thinkers alike, because it's a beautiful thing to see. I was quite disheartened, after my masters to some degree, because of just the rigidity and how overly structured, and dare I say, at times cultish things were. But but engaging with you and meeting you, has really helped sort of shift that perspective for me a lot.
Well,
And that's what
thank you.
motivated me as well to maybe go pursue further studies in the future too,
Well,
which I
good.
still have a question mark against.
There's also Michael Masters, who
Mhm.
has a tenured position in academia. Diana Pasulka, who
Yes.
has Jeffrey Kripal, and they're all writing things that are kind of eye popping. Wow.
Mhm. Yep.
And yet their institutions have not tried to get rid of them, and they are meeting with approval and acclaim in at least some quarters, if not, broadly throughout academia. That they don't seem to be losing a lot by making this kind of thing their academic focus. So there is hope. There is
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah. I think seems to be quite different from the days of John Mack, for example.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Very different since then, isn't it?
it is. Definitely, definitely. When I was writing my dissertation, when I was writing The Lure of the Edge, in one chapter, I mention Roswell. I devote a long paragraph to it and then a longer footnote saying, for more information on Roswell, read, and then there's this whole list of things you can read to get more background info. In the paragraph itself, I just gave the bare bone facts about Roswell. Something crashed. The military issued a press release saying, hey, we got a flying disc. And then within
Mhm.
24 hours, they retracted it and they said that it was a weather balloon. And there's been controversy ever since about what really did happen. And my advisor was reading through that and he looked up at me and his eyes were popping. He said, Brenda, you can't say this. It makes you sound like a believer.
Mhm.
And all I did was say Roswell happened. And he said, and I said, no, Grant, I have to say that. I've said nothing that anybody would disagree with. Even the most ardent skeptic would not disagree with this.
Mhm.
Now, how you interpret the facts of what happened and what other facts you think are also true, now that is very contested. That is very much up for grabs. But just the very fact that it happened is a matter of public record. It's not disputed. But
Mhm.
that's the state of people's thinking, what people, well-educated people, know about the UFO world. And I think today it may be a little bit better, but my guess is probably not a lot better. Somewhat, definitely. But
Mhm. Yeah, it seems like some people are more open-minded than others. Like I said, my experience when I wanted to write on this for my dissertation, uh, I went back and forth with my supervisor probably for a good 2 months, and then finally had to give in because I realized I was losing time for my dissertation, and I just had to get a subject
get
done.
something done, right?
Yeah, so but it was unfortunate, but nevertheless, you live and you learn, and you meet new people, and your perspectives change. And like I said, engaging with you and some of the, you know, highly, speculative stuff we've discussed at times, it's really refreshing as well. And I think it's important to highlight that just because you at times may tend to speculate and talk about things which may generally be considered out there, as long as you're doing it with reason and you have your
Mm-hmm.
reasons and your evidences and your
Mm-hmm.
things behind it, I think that's a good thing. It's good to think and to reflect and to ponder and to connect dots and see where they lead you.
Right, right. It's it's difficult when the dots lead you close to the edge of what is considered real and respectable. But I don't think we make much progress in our knowledge or as a species if we fail to do that.
Mhm.
we must, continue to gently but firmly push that envelope. Push the envelope of what we know, how we know it, why we know it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I guess I want you to share some of the things today with us where you've tried to push the envelope, and I know you have pushed the envelope in certain areas, at least of thought,
Right.
really interesting areas. So I guess where I want to start off with is your take on the extraterrestrial hypotheses. Now, I know you've gone through an evolution in thought, over the
Right.
years in regards to what your views are about that. So maybe take us through that, where you started and where you currently are with the extraterrestrial hypotheses and why you are where you are. What are the reasons?
Well, in a word, 2 words, Jacques Vallée.
Mhm.
In a few more words than that, Jacques' writings were very influential for me. And his idea that the extraterrestrial hypothesis didn't make sense because the entities weren't behaving like you would think another species would in encountering intelligent life forms on Earth. Now, granted, that may be because we are anthropomorphizing. We are judging what some other species ought to do because this is what we would do. And that may be very wrong. But there are other aspects of the UFO phenomenon besides the fact that it just it wasn't commensurate with what we might expect. One of the things is what they call the Hitchhiker Effect. The fact,
Mhm.
that, or like the young woman who prophesied for me that I would end up changing my dissertation, writing on UFOs, and have a book. I mean, she was right, and it was the aliens who made her psychic, who enabled her to be right.
Mhm.
And that kind of skill is not uncommon as an aftermath of contact. And when you start looking at all of that, it's one thing to say, well, yeah, any technology that's sufficiently advanced could look like magic to us, which makes sense. But what is it about that magic that would make some people start to open up psychically and begin to exhibit talents and proclivities that they had never shown any sign of having before? And I think, okay, this doesn't quite make sense. And I kind of left it at that when I finished my dissertation. I took up the question again in 2024, and I was very surprised to see that by this time, the idea that there were crashed disks and perhaps alien bodies had gained some legitimacy. It used to be a maybe, maybe not idea within the UFO subculture, and now it seemed to be more maybe, possibly,
Mhm.
very probably. And that really surprised me, the turf that it had gained. So I was trying to figure out, but Jacques had proposed the idea that these, whatever it is, it's not material in the sense that you and I, at least our bodies are material, and our desks and computers, it's not material in that way. It violates space time in ways that we can only imagine, and it has after effects that are not consistent with any kind of after effects that we know of. Uh, in terms of the normal functioning of space time. So I was trying to figure out how a kind of paranormalish view of the field and a nuts and bolts view could mesh. And I thought, well, let's say that these entities come from that they evolved. They're most of them look to be humanoid in some fashion. What if they're just another branch of the evolutionary tree, and evolution operates in all niches that it encounters, and they evolved into a fifth dimensional niche, and Homo sapiens evolved into the 3+1, the four-dimensional space-time niche. And so I thought, well, what does it look like if you evolve into the if you're in the fifth dimensional niche and you happen to come down and show yourself in four dimensions, what might that look like? And I looked at what the scientists who are not doing UFO stuff, they're just thinking about physics, what they say it would look like. And I thought, well, that's the things they were saying was exactly what was happening with UFO phenomena. And I thought, okay, well, so what kind of being could it be that is in this niche? And I was looking around because my idea is that we need to get to know whatever this is better, not just in terms of the nuts and bolts, but in terms of the intelligences, the agents behind the nuts and bolts. And I thought, where's an example of something? And it seems to me that the most well-developed conceptual framework for some kind of intelligent, non-human entity was the Islamic idea of the jinn. And so I said, why not, so let's just imagine, for instance, that maybe it's a jinn-like entity that's in the fifth dimension, and they come down here, and here's how the jinn in Islamic tradition are said to behave. And here is what we have noted with close encounters with entities associated with UFO phenomena. And there was a big overlap. And I said, what we need to do is go through our folklore, our folk beliefs, our religious systems, and take another look at the entities that humanity has left a record of encountering in the past, and see if we can make any kind of comparative sense of all of them. I've been trying to accumulate that information and make a chart of all of the different entities in each column and traits listed down the left-hand side, and then which entities show which traits. And the fairies, the gentry, and the jinn are so far the two that seem to have the most traits, that seem to be most fully described in our human history. And I'll add a trait. If some other entity is said to have it, I'll add that trait. And the jinn or the fairies or the nagas or whatever, they don't have that trait, that's fine. They just don't get a check mark on that. Just in order to accumulate a kind of roster. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I am wanting, it seems to me that when people have looked at UFO phenomena, they look at it from either a nuts and bolts perspective. All the scientists, they want to get radar returns and kick the tires and, do an EM field and look at radiation, which is fine. I mean, that's fine, but there's more to it than that. People who are in the military and the government want to look at it as, what is there that we can reverse engineer? What can we weaponize? Can we do the same stuff and weaponize it so that we can use it for our defense or offense, or, the gray area in between what's what? And then the social scientists and the humanities scholars say that they treat the subject as if it's a giant mirror and it reflects humanity. Back to ourselves. We look at it and we see ourselves in it. There's psychosocial explanations that basically tend to explain it away. And there's very little out there that considers UFOs and the entities behind them as independent agents, intelligences in their own right. And there's very little in the UFO community that does do that. And when I look at, as I'm trying to put together this comparative list of traits of entities, the depictions of the Jinn are very well elaborated, and I find myself returning again and again and again to the framework of the Jinn. And I have to remind myself regularly to stay open to other frameworks. This may not be the most useful one, but for right now, it is a useful one for me. And I've thought quite a bit about, could these entities be the Jinn? Or at least could some of what we're seeing be Jinn? It may be a multifactorial thing, that some of them may be extraterrestrial and some may not be. But to us, they look the same and we don't know how to distinguish between them. That's a possibility. And I don't know yet how to make a distinction. But what I'm trying to do is get the information and make a case that scholars need to start looking at the entities from the point of view of them being intelligent agents.
Yeah, and you made some really profound points there. So the three key areas you've mentioned, the nuts and bolts, which seems to be the predominant way that the subject or the phenomena is being approached, and not surprising, considering that we live in a post-enlightenment materialist world. So that's naturally where our attention is drawn towards. And then obviously from a government perspective, that the idea of trying to weaponize and take benefit from this technology, or what we're perceiving as technology, that's another question.
That's true.
We are, because in any experience, there's two parts. There's what's observed and the interpretation of the person observing it. So it may be because of our current zeitgeist and our conditioning, we see this stuff and we immediately say technology. And when we say that, we frame it that way, then we want to, benefit from that technology. But there's still the possibility, maybe it's not technology, maybe it's something else, so that does make sense. And then the psychic aspect, which you mentioned, which not many people mention, but I think Jung was one of the first ones to, in his book on flying saucers, propose that type of perspective. Although I don't think he himself disagreed with the physical nature of the UFOs as well.
As far as I can tell, he came down on the side, he was ambivalent. He recognized the physical nature. I mean, anything that will leave a track on radar is in some sense material, for sure. But on the other hand, there were enough characteristics of it that pointed to kind of a psychological piece. And I don't think he ever came down solidly on one side or the other.
Yeah. That was one of the areas where he couldn't sort of square the circle, but he did. It seemed to suggest that the collective unconscious, when it projects, it does take on a physical form too. But I don't think he goes into explaining how that may work. But it was very interesting, and it's at least another perspective. And then the third, as you mentioned, is that these entities are actually real beings or entities which have been mentioned in world traditions, religious texts, history, etc. And I think you've mentioned in the past, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brenda, that what may actually be happening may be it may be true that all three aspects apply to this phenomena to some extent. So there may be a psychic dimension, there may be a physical nuts and bolts dimension, and also a real tangible dimension to these beings or entities.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, in the Islamic tradition, jinn are said to be able to assume a material form. And while they are in that material form, they are subject to whatever might befall of material form. If it's a gunshot or stabbing with a knife or, a hug, whatever. I mean, they are subject to it while they're in that form. So it could be that what appears to us as material, as a material thing, like a UFO, there are some people who have allegedly had direct experience with the UFOs on the inside, and they've said it's alive. It's a living thing. It's not a machine like we think of machines.
Yeah,
So
very interesting.
even the nuts and bolts piece of it can get a little bit wavery when you look at it and uncertain.
hmm Yeah, and I guess if you look at it again from the angle of the jinn for a moment, well, I think the all three aspects fall in quite nicely. There's the nuts and bolts side, which is the builders can build
Right.
and construct things, etc. And maybe we'll get into that later on. The second part, the psychic, is again there's a lot on how the jinn manipulate the human, or can some jinn can manipulate the human psyche, waswas, or the information they can put in, and so on and so forth. Create images in someone's mind, and then obviously the real tangible side of stuff, that they do have a substance that they're created from, and they can manifest. It was really I spoke to Jay Alfred yesterday. Remember I mentioned to you that I was going to
Yes.
interview him.
Yes.
I spoke to him. He said something very interesting which I hadn't spoken about before, in regards to their physical manifestation. Because you mentioned, one of the questions you asked me to see if I can engage with him on was how this may happen. His idea is quite different from what I thought originally, but it's very interesting. And maybe let me know your thoughts on this as well, Brenda. His perspective was that, firstly, the jinn may not be plasma in the sense that we understand plasma, normal plasma.
Okay.
He refers to it as dark plasma. So it's a part of dark matter.
Right.
And I asked him, well, why would you say that as opposed to just normal regular plasma? And his answer was that normal plasma is very unstable. So, and our Earth's environment and atmosphere, it just can't exist within there for more than maybe milliseconds or less than that. But dark plasma is different because it's something to do with electromagnetic fields. I'm not a physicist, as you know, so I'm not going to try to touch the science. But apparently, something about the electromagnetic fields, that the way they may work or function within dark plasma would allow them to maintain themselves for far longer, and therefore allow in that form for life to develop over time and evolve, etc. Which I thought was interesting. And the second thing he said was about sheathing. So he said that dark plasma can have sheathing. So when it comes into contact with normal matter in our Earth atmosphere, it can, how did he say, it can latch on some of the atoms and molecules of the atmosphere around us could latch on to this dark plasma and therefore create a type of sheath or a skin, which may be a part of the manifestation that people are seeing, which I thought was another very interesting take. I'll share that with you. I'll send you the raw file later on today.
Yeah. What kind of sheathing? I'm reminded of the story of the hunter who went out hunting and ran across a UFO and entities outside of it. I don't remember the details of the story exactly. I think he was trying to hunt a moose or an elk. He had tracked a herd of them, and he was going to shoot one and have elk meat or moose meat for the winter. And he tracked it to a UFO, and there were entities outside, and the UFO were levitating the herd of moose or elk into their UFO. And he thought, that's my elk, I've been tracking that. And he tried to shoot, and the bullet went just so far
Stop.
and then just fell to the ground. Would that sheathing be what caused that? Because they went back later and they found the bullets, all squished up, and so would that be the kind of sheathing that he was talking about?
Possibly. I think what
Yeah.
he was specifically referring to was the type of, uh, it forms like a skin
Yeah.
of matter around the plasma, which is very physical because it's made of
Yeah.
physical molecules and
Right.
atoms like other physical
Right.
things. So if you were to touch it, say it takes on a form of a gray alien. If you were to touch that being, it would feel like you're actually touching a real person. Like it would feel real material. Now, can that be extended out to like a type of force field around them in some, okay, possibly. I mean,
Yeah.
we can speculate, I guess.
Yeah.
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 It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Sorry, we just went off on a bit of a tangent, so I'm going to bring it back
Good tangent.
to
Good tangent. I
good
like that.
tangent. Yeah, good
Yeah.
tangent. So the other thing I wanted to ask you, I heard you mention in regards to the ET hypotheses that this has been there from the very beginning of the phenomena, and it may, I've heard you speculate that it may have been pushed by certain factions from the intelligence communities, potentially to create a type of, I don't know if psyop is the right word, but
Yeah.
maybe you want. What's your thoughts
Oh.
in regards to that today?
I have a strong sense that we need to look very carefully at all of the story threads that run through the UFO narrative from 1947 or 1930 on to today. Because in 1947, no, it wasn't 47, I think it was 48 into 49, the US government had done a study of the UFOs that people were reporting and decided that, well, there's nothing to see there. But one of the documents released under the Freedom of Information Act here is a letter in which one department of I think it's the military intelligence, is forwarding all of the UFO material to the Psyops division and saying, there may be something useful for you in here. And I think that is pretty much what happened. That what kind of events UFO sightings are, and what the entities are, and the craft seem to be. That's one question. But the other question is, what can we make them seem to be? How can we plant ideas into the public consciousness in such a way to hide legitimate government research projects, to hide clandestine projects, to influence the behavior of our political enemies who might, so we plant ideas that make it sound like we're a whole lot further advanced than what we are technologically. There's all kinds of reasons and functions that planting ideas within the UFO community could serve. And I think that we need to track these threads through time and, track the chain of evidence for each thread. Does it come down to hearsay? Is it so-and-so said it, and that's because this other so-and-so said it? He said it because he said he had a clandestine informant who told him that. Well, in the end, what we have is he said, she said, he said. But we don't even have anybody who claims to have physically witnessed something, first-person account.
Yeah.
They do surface, and I'm not sure what to make of those. The father-in-law of a friend of mine, on his deathbed, told his family about an encounter he had when he was working a side job while he was enlisted or well enlisted. And he was working a side job, and he was taken to see an entity, he and several other people. And his family had no clue that he had any interest. He never showed any interest in the UFO topic, never said anything. And for him to come out on his deathbed and tell them this, you're kind of left, well, it's a first person account, and there are a couple of reasons why it makes sense to trust the old man and what he said. But I think that when we track the various threads of, the various themes that have run through the UFO community over the last 80 years, we're going to find very few of those. We're going to have very few tracking it back to a first-person account who says, yes, I had a first-hand experience. I haven't done that homework yet, so we'll see. But until then, it pays to hold all ideas as tentatively as you can.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're spot on. As you said, there's very few first person accounts. Maybe one person that comes to mind is James Lukatsky. In a recent Weaponized podcast, he mentioned that he actually encountered or went inside or tried to go inside one of these craft, etc. But majority are second, third person. Someone said that someone said, or in a file, it was read in a file somewhere. And this does bring to question, the whole idea of is this whole disclosure movement, at least that's from an official perspective, is it possibly a type of psyop for one objective or another? It's like you said, I think to hold it tentatively is probably the best approach. There's a very interesting video. Someone sent it to me the other day. It was by Grant Cameron, Managing Magic. So this individual, he's basically tracked the government's movements over the past since the 40s, and he's picked up on certain tactics that were used throughout the decades to spread misinformation, disinformation, mislead people. And what he's highlighting is that, and this was done about 5 years ago, so it was prior to the congressional hearings and everything. And he said that he was, assuming that a very similar type of quote unquote disclosure uptake is happening again for one reason or the other. I'll definitely share this video with you as well. Would love to get your thoughts on this.
I saw a video of him, and like you, it was a few years back that he did this video. I don't remember what the title of it was. It may be the same thing.
Possibly,
but
yeah.
I would like to see what you've got, because that sounds like what needs to happen. Yeah.
And how much do you think, and you probably looked at this extensively as well, how much do you think pop culture, Hollywood, Netflix, and other sort of media outlets, news outlets have played a role in shaping the current consciousness surrounding the topic of UFO and UAP, and how much that's probably fed into the ETI hypothesis?
I think it has conditioned people to think about these kinds of things. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the idea of extraterrestrial life was out there. I mean, there were some people who thought about these things, but the vast majority of people had no idea and no reason to have an idea. I think that the entertainment industry has let that idea spread much more widely. Just the very fact that there could be non-human intelligence. But as to its relationship to us and how it behaves and how we behave in return, that I'm not sure Hollywood has necessarily done a creditable job of getting people to think. But there are notable exceptions to that, and maybe when push comes to shove, that will be enough.
Perfect. So I guess moving on now swiftly to another area that you've been looking into, which is you briefly mentioned it already, Brenda, the comparison between, and I'm again really looking forward to your findings in regards to these different entities cross-culturally and how they match and don't match. It's going to be
Right.
really interesting to see. Um, but how did, so I guess the next question is, when did you first come across the idea of the jinn in particular? And what was it like that about the phenomena itself that you had studied that led you to start making those connections? Like, did something stick out to you straight away?
The how did I come across the gym in the first place? I don't remember exactly.
Was it long,
I,
long ago?
it was quite a while ago. It was, I knew that the Islamic world had the idea of jinn within it. But what that meant, how that worked, some more of the fine points about it, I had no idea. I had to start doing quite a bit of reading to figure out, okay, what knowledge does the Islamic world have for us about this particular kind of entity?
Mhm, mhm. And when you started looking into it, what are there certain features or aspects of the jinn that stick out to you for you personally when it comes to the phenomena?
Um, the fact that they shapeshift, the fact that they're tricksters, which is an anthropologically polite way of saying they don't always tell the truth or behave like we would expect a sane, rational person to behave. Um, the fact that they're said to be made out of what, fire or fire and air, and when you think of what a plasma looks like, at least a plasma made out of light matter, material matter, um, that's a real good description of. I've
Mhm,
seen plasmas formed in laboratories. When you look at some of the orbs that are associated with UFOs, they look like they roil and move and boil inside, like the plasmas I've seen in laboratories. So I assume they may be roughly analogous. And that sounds exactly like how the jinn are described.
mhm.
So it's, the identification is, it's hard to miss. They seem to appear in the same way. They shapeshift. They pop in and pop out. Um, they are not necessarily reliable sources of information. They like to mess around with humans. Some of them do, at least. Um, those are the ones
Yes,
that
hey,
stood out.
and stood out to you. There's a. I remember the first time for me was funnily enough Skinwalker Ranch. The first, I think it was the first season
Yeah.
when it came out several years ago. And what's really fascinating about that place and other such places is that you don't have one type of manifestation. You have
Yep.
the whole,
Yep.
Heinz 57. You got everything going on in one place. Cryptids, UFOs, paranormal activity, different frequencies and radiation and all of this type of stuff that's going on. Doppelgangers and
Mm-hmm.
everything is literally happening in one location. And then the question arises, well, is this, what's the most sound inference you can make here? Is this many different unusual, paranormal, super spectral energies, forces, entities that have somehow just all ended up in one place? Or is it one source which is manifesting in various different ways? So that was initial thing for me. And then the second thing I thought for me that struck me was, like you said, the hitchhiker effect. When I heard that concept, it's a very fitting term if you think about it, something that attaches itself to you, catches a ride, basically, leaves with you, goes home. Have you researched the Hitchhiker Effect in much detail?
I have not. Have you?
Briefly, but not in too much depth. I think you mentioned this to me earlier about Eric Davies, and I saw it on a
Yes.
forum online as well. That he had an event where he was
Mhm.
overtaken by something,
Right.
and he couldn't
He
recall
was
it.
he was possessed. Momentarily,
Oh.
he was possessed
Mhm.
by an entity that used his vocal apparatus to say something. I don't know. I don't remember what it said. But then it released him. It didn't take over for long. And this is when he and at least one other person were out, chasing an orb across the Skinwalker property. And if I recall correctly, it had taken taken rest in some treetops or among some branches, and the other person and Eric were standing, back a ways and trying to figure out what to do about it. And at one point, it just took Eric over for a moment, a few
Wow.
moments.
And did he vocalize? Was he speaking in his own voice, or did the voice change?
If I recall correctly, the voice was slightly different. It wasn't quite his voice, but I
Mhm.
don't know if I'm remembering that correctly. But it was
Mhm.
definite that the person or people who were with him, it was very clear that this was not Eric, that he was gone.
Mhm. And he couldn't recall anything once he came back around, right?
Couldn't recall a thing.
Yeah, I remember when you told me that. I literally sent a shiver down my spine, because I was thinking, like, because I've spoken to so many, Islamic
Right.
exorcists or Muslim
Yes.
exorcists, and it's a very common report where when they're treating people, when something's speaking through them, these entities, these jinn, that when they come around, they don't recall any of it. They don't
Yeah.
remember any of it. And
Yeah.
I was like, this is like a perfect match with what you were saying.
Mhm.
And again, there's so many points of contact like that, which are
Yeah.
quite startling. The link to water as well, and all of these other
Right.
things. Um, let me. So obviously, over the years, as you've been speaking about this, Brenda, you've probably had some interest from, people like Eric Davies and other
Mhm.
scientists and physicists, potentially people from other, I don't know, institutes, etc. What has been the feedback? Like, I'm sure you've been very open with your current position and perspectives on these things. Has there been much feedback? What have they said?
Well, Eric Davis, bless him, uh, was at Rice University when I gave a talk in the spring of 2025. And that's the talk where I put it all together about dimensions and these entities, whatever they are that are coming in, might be that maybe they may live here with us. They're right beside us. They live here, but just in a space time place that we don't perceive. And as an example, maybe the jinn. And when I was talking about this, Eric was leaning over to a woman that was sitting next to him and saying, "She's exactly right. She's right on target." And I found out later about him saying that, and we got to meet virtually via Zoom, and we went over my presentation, and Eric was giving me feedback in detail on all the pieces of what I had said. The bottom line seems to be that what I proposed is kind of where other people who have been working with this for many years in the government, in the military, a number of them have come to that conclusion as well. That whatever this is, it lives right here. It's right here with us. It's been here for as long as humans have, possibly longer, which would also fit in with the Islamic mythology of the jinn, uh,
Mhm.
that they predate the human species. Um, and outside of that, I haven't gotten direct feedback from a lot of higher ranking, well-known in the spotlight kind of figures in the UFO field. Jeff Kripal seems to like my work, bless him. Diana Pasulka is a supporter. Oh, I hate to leave somebody out, and I'm sure I am leaving out important others. Jacques
Jacques Vallée.
Vallée.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just thinking that.
Jacques Vallée, which just means the world to me because he's kind of like unofficially, I feel like he's my mentor. He's the godfather. He's the one who started down this path before most other people had. And so to have his support, that's not to say that he agrees or anybody agrees entirely with what I may say or write, but on the whole, they seem to approve. And that means a lot to me. And the fact that people like you ask me to talk, and I'm thinking, why me? I haven't done anything. I'm not that important, but it seems to be a matter of the book and then the work that I've done in the UFO field in the last 2 years. And I think the book was enabled. You talk about having a muse. Well, call the muse whatever you want to call it. But I think the muse assisted a lot in writing The Lure of the Edge. I did all the work. I did all the research. I wrote every word. But that kind of feeling of being in the zone, it was there for that book. I wrote a book that I self-published in 2023, and I can assure you the second book did not happen like that. It was multiple revisions and many years. So I really do think that The Lure of the Edge was a message that was wanting to get out there, and I was the vehicle for that message. And
Yeah,
on the
absolutely.
basis of that, people seem to respect the work that I've done, and for that I am grateful. I am grateful.
Yeah, and you're continuing to do phenomenal work. Obviously, you're working on some projects which we can't disclose or I guess speak about currently, but phenomenal stuff that's still to come from yourself and your team as well. Which again, we won't say just in case,
Yeah. Well,
save me editing the video later on. So
we're
just
we're
hold back as
we're
much as I
we
can.
are working on a project that it's a small project, but I don't think anybody's done anything like it before. And Imran, you're part of our team now, and we think that it's something important to say, and I hope that we can bring this around and find a good publisher for it and get the information out there.
Absolutely, it's wherever I can help. I'm just so impressed by the way everything that you guys have done thus far. It's like from last night's meeting is phenomenal. So yeah, I'm excited to help wherever I can, and learn from yourself and the others. So Brenda, I guess so. One more thing I do want to put out there, because some people may say, "Oh, look, you're just talking about the Jinn, and it's just Jinn," and Brenda's saying it's Jinn, and let's be a bit nuanced here. We're not. The Jinn you can see as a type of archetype or a glove,
Right.
which has it. Just because we're using the term Jinn, it doesn't mean it excludes all other historical entities. because
Right.
essentially what we're getting at is that they see all of these different manifestations of this one source. It's the same thing. It's been known as different things through cultures, throughout history, etc. The
I
reason
think
I
it may
myself,
be. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I'm total agreement from at least the little research I've done. So when we say the jinn, for me at least, the way I see it is one of the I think profound things about the Islamic tradition in regards to the concept of jinn is that there's a lot of material there, and
Mhm.
it builds a very clear model of these entities, right? You could take the word jinn out and replace it with something else if you like. It's not a problem, but the point is that it gives you a very deep
Model.
framework, which you can then, it's like a rubric or a type of
Yes.
framework that's there
Mhm.
that you can use to start off with and then analyze everything else and see where the dots connect.
Yeah.
And like we said, fairies, they've been known as, the gentry folk, not hitchhikers, skinwalkers,
Right.
the Dopi in the Caribbean,
Uh-huh.
the
The
Nagas,
Nagas in Southeast
so many
Asia.
different names. Yep,
Tengu in
yep. So
Japan.
there you go. Yep.
Yep.
How
Yep.
how many roughly are there that you've come across thus far? Rough
Well, so
numbers.
far I've read up on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I've got 10 columns that I'm still trying to read up on all of the different entities mentioned there. I ran across another one recently in my reading, and I need to figure out if this is just the same one from the same culture, but just a slightly different time frame when the name had evolved, or if I need to put another column into my little chart here.
From a theological perspective, when I study the jinn and I look at the manifestations of the phenomena, okay, I see, okay, this is what we call the jinn within the
Mhm.
Islamic tradition. But that's not to say that the jinn were limited to the Arabian Peninsula, right? So
Oh, yeah.
they are a cross-cultural phenomena. They've been there far longer than us, according to the traditions. And again, what Islam does is it gives a lot of details in regards to the ontological nature, what they're
Right.
comprised of, what the teleology, the meaning behind their existence,
Mhm.
their purpose and objectives
Right.
of the good ones and the bad ones. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of information there, and I think that's what makes it interesting. And someone researching this, you can approach it historically at the very
Right.
least. That's what I've
Right.
always said is that even if you don't believe in the tradition or whatever the case is, that's not the
Right.
point here. The point is you have a document which you can at least acknowledge from a purely secular perspective as historically sound. There's a
Right.
lot of work, for example, Cambridge Companion to the Quran, etc., which shows that what you have as far as texts in the Islamic tradition are pretty much the same as they were 1400 years ago. So you have a very strong historical corpus that you can access, and there's a lot of information there that can enrich the discussion on the
Right.
phenomena. And I think that's
Right.
what you've been doing, and which has made your approach very powerful. As you said, I'm going to dive into these sources and I'm going to look at what's there and
Mhm.
see if that helps broaden
Right.
our perspective on what's going on. And I think, maybe I'm
Yeah.
not saying in the best way possible, but what's your thoughts in regards to that? To looking
I
at the
yeah.
entities themselves.
Yeah. I'm ready for the UFO field and eventually all of humanity to look at these entities as intelligent agents, intellectual agents, moral agents, in their own right. They don't just reflect us. But I do think that humanity has a long term relationship with them in some fashion. And uh, the part of the relationship that has been problematic for humans, uh, the bad jinn, they're, let's face it, if somebody from another world, an extraterrestrial, were to come and land in one of the worst suburbs of Chicago or one of the seediest parts of London and form an idea of how humans behaved and how humans were from that alone, it wouldn't be wrong, but it's not the full picture. And I'm an advocate for trying to figure out what the full picture might be. The Quran also talks about jinn who converted to Islam, which, Islam is pretty strict about honesty and, the straight and narrow. So if some jinn were able to do that, and honestly be considered Muslim, then I think that's important to acknowledge that there are jinn who do not behave that way. And there may be a whole bunch of jinn who frankly just don't care about humans. They have their lives, their societies, they're not worried about us, or, we're irrelevant. And I'd like to be able to flesh out that picture. It's going to take time, I think, because naturally enough, we pay attention to the things that are, likely to hurt us or deceive us, make life difficult. So, of course, we pay a lot of attention to that. But when it comes to determining the agency of whatever this might be, I want us to be able to look at the kind of entities that we would like to have a relationship with, that we would not mind being friends with. And I know in Islamic society, there's the whole issue of marriage, which is fascinating to consider. I mean, relationship going so far as to include marriage. I don't know. I'm just saying it's there. I don't know what to make of it. I do wonder about things like the Muse and the number of people down through history who have felt that some of these entities were whisperers, but in a good way, in an inspirational way. Are these different entities that have done this, in human minds and ears for aeons? Or is it, just other jinn who happen to be, decent folk, the kind you wouldn't mind having as next door neighbors? I don't know. I have questions, no answers.
The marriages thing you mentioned, Brenda, which is very interesting. I've been doing a bit of a deep dive into that. And you sent me a paper as well on the Shafi tradition and how the whole law was discussed around, these marriages and relationships.
Right, yeah.
The first thing that fascinated me about that and the other scholars that have written about these things is, well, why did they write about it? Well, they wrote about it because it was happening in the society. It was a real thing going on. So they found the need to write about this stuff. And at least from the Islamic tradition, it seems like that it was a metaphysical possibility that these relationships could take place. Most of the scholars agreed to this.
Right.
However, from a legal standpoint, most of them said it was disliked. So it didn't fall into the category of completely forbidden, but it was disliked by the majority. Then the next category was that, okay, it shouldn't be done. These marriages shouldn't take place because of the legal issues and problems that would, the challenges there. And then there was a small group of scholars who said, yeah, it was allowed. But for me personally, I'm not into the study, I'm not into the law side of it. What I was interested in, well, is there a metaphysical possibility? And it seems to be that it was. Now, for me, then personally, it forms another point of contact with the UFO phenomena, because we know there's a whole space there of hybridization, children being born of certain relationships with these entities, etc. So yeah, again, the points of contact keep emerging, and it's really a fascinating study. Let me ask you, Brenda, about fairies. I want to know, I don't know much about the fairy lore. So what similarities have you found between the fairies and the jinn?
Relationship to humans.
Okay.
Interest in having children. The focus on children, although the focus in fairyland seems to be somewhat different, but not totally so, because there are, legends about humans being carried off to fairyland where they have children there. So, clearly they would be hybrid types of entities, and also stories about people here, in this reality space-time system, having fairy children. The shape-shifting nature of these entities, the fact that where they live, the kind of geographic areas where they are reputed to live, it's always apart from humans. They're within what for them is apparently a stone's throw of human settlements and human, houses, but not necessarily right up against them. I don't think they want to be that close to us. Okay. The fact that they appear and disappear at will, the fact that time in their presence can move in really weird ways that doesn't track with how time moves for most of us most of the time. The issue of what they eat being somewhat different and special compared to what humans eat. Let me consult my list here and see if I can come up with other stuff. Sensitivity to iron and salt. Not liking it.
Interesting.
They travel fast. They travel very fast. Tricksterous behavior. They love music. Well, the Fae are noted to love music and dancing. I don't remember reading much about that for the Jinn. Both of them can produce illusions to the human. They have social orders. They have their own societies and own structures. They have families. They seem to exist in subtypes. They may be defined, the Jinn are apparently defined by colors: black, white, red, green. I'm not sure how the Fae are described. They can take animal forms. The Fae, possibly. They tend to kidnap people. They're kidnappers. And they have a religious inclination.
Wow.
Those are traits that I've noted so far.
Wow. That's quite that's quite a few. That's and when you see stuff like that, Brenda, I don't know about you, but you can't help but infer based on data like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the natural process of human cognition and rationality to see that data and say, okay, if there's like 5 points that match, okay, very interesting. 10 points that match, okay, that's even more interesting. When you get to like 15, 20 points, you're like, okay, if it swims like a duck and it quacks like a duck,
Quacks
then
like a
it
duck.
probably is a duck. Right?
Probably is a duck. And yet in proper academic circles, you cannot say that. You can only say that there's a pattern match. And I noted that Diana Pasolfi uses that term a lot, that there's a pattern match. She's just noting a pattern match. Well, you can't argue with that. Yeah, there's a pattern here. It does seem to match. But when you go attributing traits, identifying one with the other, that's another issue. Notice the same thing. I just read a paper about consciousness theory and DMT entities. And again, the authors are very careful to say, we're not saying that these entities are real, but they go on to describe a situation in a setting where it would make sense if they were real. Here's how it could be. We're not saying they are, but here's how it would make sense and how it would match with what people experience when they have DMT trips. So I noticed that reluctance to identify things and describe agency to them, to cross-identify and ascribe agency. And that's probably very good. It's a very cautious approach. But I can't help thinking that at some point, we're not going to be able to do that anymore. At some point, it's just going to become, well, yeah, it's when they appear in Ireland and Brittany and Wales, they look one way, and in France and Germany, they look another way, and in the Middle East, they look another way. I've wondered if maybe whatever these entities are that seem to be living here with us, if some of them, if different kinds settle in different parts of the globe. For instance, the ones around Colares in Brazil, back in the 70s, they were not showing their best side. They were hurting people, and in some cases, a couple of people died, maybe not directly, but indirectly because of the behaviors of these entities. And I'm thinking, okay, well, the kind of entities that they had down there, at least at that time, were just nasty buggers.
Yeah.
Nobody'd want to. But then it stopped. Well, why did it stop? Or else it radically diminished. Did it stop? Was there some kind of a conflict between factions of these entities among themselves, and the humans were just kind of collateral? Or did some no-goodniks invade the area, and other entities in this realm drove them out and restrained them and says, no, no, you cannot do this. I don't know. All I know is that it seems like there are sometimes notable differences geographically, like in temperament is what I'm noting, and how dangerous these entities can be.
And it seems like sometimes there's more than one, you can say, subspecies in one location potentially as well. And like you said, there may be a case of warring, because at least from an Islamic standpoint, the idea of warring is there very
Yeah,
clearly. So, for
yeah,
example, the angels, when in the narrative of the creation of the human being, the angels say, "Are you going to create something that causes corruption and bloodshed?"
uh-huh,
And the scholars highlight in the exegesis that they mention this because they were aware of what the jinn were doing on the earth prior to human beings, corruption and bloodshed. Then the story about the abduction of the man. This one group of jinn came and conquered the other ones, the evil ones, and then they released the man. So the warring stuff is very interesting as well. That there's possibly a war going on, like just with human beings, where we war, unfortunately, and there seems to be the same with these
yeah,
entities as well, potentially. Um, and I guess that boils down to the limited self human beings. We're not divine as the jinn kind. They're not divine, so there's always flaws in personality, ego,
right, right,
pride, vengefulness. That's
right.
always going to be a play in corporal entities. So that may explain to some degree that warring nature. I wanted to ask you, Brenda, about D.W. Pasulka. You've mentioned her a couple
Yeah,
of times. She's done some phenomenal work. I think one of her books is coming out very soon,
yeah.
her new book. I've been following her stuff for several years. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to get through to her, but um, have you spoken to her? Because I know she approaches it from a predominantly a Christian,
Uh-huh,
saintly experience
right.
perspective, which is very interesting, and the experiences they had. Um, have you guys sort of shared notes? Anything you can share with us in regards to?
We really haven't shared a lot of notes. Every once in a while, when I'm reading, I'll come across some reference to some event that I think Diana might have an interest in, and I'll shoot it off to her. We haven't compared notes a great deal. Tell you the thing with Diana that kind of surprised me greatly is she went back to the original sources in the Vatican archives and did a deep read about the story of St. Francis of Assisi and his getting the stigmata and seeing, having the vision. And she said, what isn't reported in the tradition is that he got really sick after that. And within like a year and a half, he died. And which is something that we see today in UFO experiences. Sometimes experiencers exhibit symptoms of radiation poisoning after an encounter, a close encounter. And nowadays we do have medical steps. We can identify what it seems to be. We take medical steps and these people seem to be helped. But, in St. Francis's day, there was nothing, so the idea that he would have had this encounter and received marks in his flesh. Yeah, I didn't know all this. And Dana says it's not a part of the larger narrative. These are the pieces that aren't talked about. So that's what Diana, and I'm looking forward to more in this next book. She and I don't share a lot of information back and forth, but every once in a while we do chit chat and talk. Because she's a stone's throw from where I live, and so is Chris Bledsoe, who has the ongoing relationship with what he calls the lady. So, something. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sure.
The idea of Karen, the
Korean, yes.
there you go. That when a human is born, they are paired with a Korean.
Every child when it's born, it has a equivalent Korean, which is, if you look at the text on the Korean, there's not too much there, but from whatever's that's there, it seems like it's the darker side of the jinn, a more malevolent jinn, which is paired with every human being, which throughout his life would sometimes try to tempt and whisper to him towards negative stuff, etc.
Right.
But at the same time, there's texts of that there's angels also that are paired with a human being when they are born into this world. So you've always had that positive and negative input coming in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I have not found a lot written about the Korean. Am I saying it right? Korean?
Korean, yeah, Korean, yes, Korean, yeah.
So it's that the idea, when I'm thinking about what kind of relationships humanity might have had over the millennia with these entities, assuming that the entities are real, assuming that the entities are invisible to us most of the time, I'm using that framework. The fact that we are, that this is a very fundamental relationship. I mean, when you're paired up with one of these entities at birth, that seems quite significant.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's that interaction, throughout life. It does relate to some of the other ideas. Like, for example, I think Patrick Harper mentions daemons within the Greek culture. Jung himself had an entity that would speak to him, and they would go on walks together and discuss things, etc. And he even mentioned that not always was the entity friendly or nice. Sometimes you'd be testing and push him and challenge him and throw him off, etc. But yeah, it's really so yeah, that idea is there. What was I going to ask you? It was something I was going to ask you. Oh yes, you mentioned Brazil. So the experiences in Brazil. Last week, I had the opportunity to interview, or a friend of mine's interviewed Ronnie Vernet. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's one of the ufologists in Brazil. And he's produced a few documentaries. He has a physics background. He's got a master's in physics and so on. So he's been doing grassroots work in Brazil over the past decade or so, probably longer, since 2018. So a bit less than a decade. And he's had some phenomenal experiences, Brenda. Honestly, some of the things he was sharing with us. And he's shared some of the footage in the documentary as well. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things he noted, and I don't know if you come across this in your research, was that at least in Brazil, that wherever these entities are found in concentration, at least the malevolent ones that are harming people, there always seems to be some type of occult practices and rituals that are taking place in those localities, in those areas. And he's noted that in many of his field research and places he's been to in the Amazon in Brazil. Have you picked up on that? At least for the negative side of this stuff?
I have heard this mentioned once in passing somewhere. I have not heard it referenced specifically to Colaris, but it would make sense. I think that's the thing about these kinds of trying to have any kind of relationship with these kinds of entities. First of all, you should not attempt to do this lightly. You need to do a lot of that reading, a lot of talking to experts. You need to do your homework big time if you're going to do it. And you need to take protective measures because you don't know what you're going to run up against. And it's quite possible, I think, the easiest route, the fastest route is probably to the less discriminating among these other folks, the low life other folks, the ones that you really don't want to have a relationship with. It may be the easiest route for somebody who's dabbling in the occult to attach to get to someone, to open up a passageway that allows those types of entities to enter.
Yeah, and it's that cautious approach you're mentioning, as you mentioned before to me, so I think it's something that needs to be heard by people, because one thing I'm noticing is that there's a lot of encouragement online these days to engage in contacting these entities through these different protocols, and the knowledge of the things you mentioned about safeguarding yourself, learning first, etc. It's not there. So it's quite a dangerous thing that's going on currently, because at least from my anecdotal experience with people that have done this, and I've spoken to a few just in the past couple of months, it's always ended up in a situation where they don't want to be anymore. Like they've been the Hitchhiker Effect. Something's following them around, affecting the kids, their family, etc. And it's a very difficult thing to shake off once it starts. So it's, I guess, being cautious is important.
The saying in the paranormal community is, when you look into the abyss looks back at you. And if you're going to have the abyss looking back at you, you need to have some idea of what to do and how to try to protect yourself in the process. I just think it makes good sense for me to formalize the scattered bits of things that I have heard about in terms of psychic self-defense and get some formal training, see what happens. I mean, just see if it feels like good technique to use.
Yeah, because because there's so much interest in this topic online currently, and I guess if you look at it from the times that we live in, many academics have mentioned it as the age of disenchantment and materialism and nothing beyond the physical, and it's all dry and empty. So ideas like this are really intriguing, luring, taking from the title of your book, enticing. But we need to be careful. As exciting as it seems, people don't know what they're getting into. And I think there's enough reports out there already, like you mentioned. There's things that aren't mentioned enough, like the experiences in Brazil where physical harm's been done to people. Jacques Vallée mentions them. John Kyo mentions them as well in his works. D.W. Pasulka, as far as I know, in her recent podcast, she's actually, again, her thoughts seems to have evolved over the years as well. Currently, it seems like she's thinking that a lot of this is very dark, from what I've heard of her online. And it seems like she doesn't want to engage it too much, because she started off very agnostic with the topic initially.
Right.
So it is something people need to be cautious of, I guess.
That's I gather that as well. And I keep trying to find a middle path between the people who say, oh, it's all dark, and the people who say, no, no, it's light and lovely, and it's, the Space Brothers who will save us. Somewhere in between those two extremes is probably where wisdom lies. But I don't know exactly, where the extremes end and wisdom exists. It's probably not a firm dividing line. It's probably kind of a squishy dividing line. But I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, I guess matters are complicated when you know that at least amongst the malevolent of these entities, that it is their nature to trick and deceive. That throws
Yep.
a big spanner into the works, right there. So,
Right.
like, what are you dealing with? How could you be sure?
Right.
It's their word against your understanding, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what else was there? There was another thing I wanted to ask you. My brain is simply just, I guess, is the lack of sleep that's
No
affecting me.
doubt.
Yeah, I need to catch up tonight. But Brenda, it's honestly, it's been a absolutely brilliant, discussion. I'm really, looking forward to another one potentially in the future as well, because I know there's so much more that we can go into and so much more
Yeah.
detail we can bring up. Any sort of last thoughts you want to share with us in regards to this topic?
Number one, if you're going to study UFOs, do your homework. Find out about at least the modern history of UFOs in some depth for the last 80 years. Figure out that 80-year span. If I say Lonnie Zamora in Socorro, New Mexico, or Colares in Brazil, or Rua in was it Tanzania?
I think
Rua,
Zimbabwe,
Zimbabwe.
somewhere in
There was a
Zimbabwe.
Z in
Yes.
there somewhere. It's Zimbabwe. You ought to immediately have a mental image of, oh yeah, I know that case. Tremonton, Oregon, Framingham, I think it's New Mexico. Of course, I'm more informed about U.S. stuff than I am worldwide, but Valençol, France. A movie was made of that, and I am waiting for it to be dubbed into English. Cannot wait, because my ear for French is rotten. People, do your homework. Understand what the history of encounters has been. Understand what people have thought and said about it. And then try to be as scientific, as methodical, and careful as you can. I think it is, although I don't think materialism is ultimately a framework that we can use to understand this phenomenon, I think our several hundred years of focusing on materialist approaches to reality has given us tools and insights that it's going to be good to hold on to as we move forward to try to make sense of all of this. I think it's like the scientists are going to really hate me. It's like going to elementary school before you go to middle school or high school. You learn some really basic things about the material world, and you learn how to look at it, how to manage it, to measure it. I mean, it's good stuff. There's good principles there that can be carried over into looking at the non-material, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a challenge, isn't it? I think, and there's a lot of discussion about religions being affected by the disclosure of this phenomena. I think what we're discovering, especially the work you're doing, and the more discussions as they continue, is that possibly it's going to present a challenge to the materialist paradigm as much as it probably would to the religion, if not more in some cases, because straight away, if you assume a materialist worldview, it's like blinkers, right? So you can only see in a certain direction, and you may be from the get-go preventing yourself from seeing the true nature of what's going on. the metaphysics of it, so the spiritual aspects of it, those will be outside of even your periphery. So it's about broadening your horizon. And I think there have been some, for example, Thomas Nagel, he's a philosopher of science who himself is an atheist, but he said something very interesting in one of his books, Mind and Cosmos. He said, we need to broaden our perspective or our methodology when it comes to certain realities like consciousness, human truth-bearing rational faculties, ethics and morals, for us to understand those realities more comprehensively. And I think the same applies to the phenomena, if not more so, because we're dealing with something, like you said, that's just on the edge. And it's probably the most challenging topic. And to fully understand it, I think it's going to be a multidisciplinary approach, not just science or just philosophy or just religion or theology. I think everyone has to come together and look at different angles or perspectives and see the whole picture. So yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think it's a case of being brave, I guess, like you have and others. Gordon Crichton was an example, a British diplomat back in the day.
Yes.
He got a lot of stick for him taking a very hard line on the jinn back then, but he stuck to his guns and he carried on doing what he was doing. Rosemary Ellen Gully, she's also someone before she passed, was talking about this stuff and making connections to the jinn. Jacques Vallée, I think, has briefly mentioned it in one of his interviews and in Dimensions. John Keel, although he doesn't mention jinn, he has what he theorizes as the super spectrum is very in line with these entities, whether you call them jinn or fairies. And I think there's several I can't remember the names of right now, but and I think every one of these individuals has not only been brave, but if you look at their methodology and their approach to the subject, they've been very thorough. You can't say they haven't been thorough. Like Jacques Vallée is well respected, and one of the reasons is because of his thorough approach. And likewise with yourself. I mean, your work is the lure of the edge, and even your podcasts online or your lectures online, they're very well researched and thorough. So you're making claims, but you're backing them up with solid research. And I think that approach is something for us to for all of us to learn from. In this specific field, and I think we'll make so much more progress if we were to adopt this open-mindedness, okay, let's look at the philosophy, let's look at the religion, let's look at the science and see where it all intersects and connects. And I think that's very powerful.
Yep, I think you're right. This is definitely a multidisciplinary question, a multidisciplinary issue that it's going to take a lot of people looking from different angles to begin to piece together something that is workable and rational, for want of a better word.
Yeah, Brenda, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to having you back on next in the future as well. Thank you for your time. I'll let you go now. I've had you on for, taken 2 hours almost of your time. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's great. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I always learn new things when I talk to you. So I always enjoy our chats because you are a fount of information and wisdom for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Brenda. Thank you. Take care.
I
And I'll
shall.
speak to you next time. Take
Okay,
care.
thanks. You too. Bye-bye.